Hello crafters and welcome to the Hobby Maker Tutorial YouTube channel. Thanks for joining me. I'm James Hembrow and I'm going to share with you the next few techniques that we're going to be sharing with you around our intro to stamping and inks. Now if you've been following this whole series, we've built right up from the very basics of what's a dye and what's a pigment type ink and the different bases to them. We've even looked at the different types of stamps and just the real basics of how to create a stamp. So make sure you watch back all over those videos. Maybe if you're new to crafting, hopefully you'll learn a few little tips and tricks along the way. But what I want you to do here is just kind of bring a few of those things that we've learnt. We looked at heat embossing recently as well, and just show you how you can use your inks in different ways with your stamps, and also actually put into practice some of the differences I was telling you about the ink pads right at the beginning. So we're going to have a little look here at some solvent inks. We're going to look at some pigment inks. We're also going to work with stamping white on black, something that's traditionally quite difficult, but if you know the right types of techniques and the right type of ink to use, it's really striking and a really effective way of working for your creations. So let's have a look at a few techniques right away now. I'm going to be working with a really nice big red rubber stamp. Reason for doing this is a lot of people shy away from big stamps, be it rubber or clear, it really doesn't matter. I love working with big background stamps like this. I think it's a great way of creating loads of texture. It's a lovely design this, it works really, really well. I just wanted to prove to you that it's not all about having smaller stamps where you're thinking, he's applying more pressure and that's why it's working. So if you like, I'm making this as hard as possible for myself to show you that even with larger stamps, it's actually very simple to create a really nice stamped effect. And trust me, I'm just using the right inks and the right tools to make this all work for me. So I've got my stamping platform here from Sizzix, and I've got my cardstock stuck down in position, some black cardstock, and that's just been held there by that sticky background. Like I said, there's plenty of videos out there from Sizzix about using the platforms and other people. And I'm just going to apply my stamp onto the top of my stamping platform like so. And I've got that adhered, and I know it's going to line up and register absolutely perfect with my background cardstock that I've got in place there. Let me just pop my carrier sheet to one side. And then what we'll have a look at is, let's start with some white ink. So we learned in other videos that anything that's pigment based is going to sit on the surface of the cardstock, and therefore it's not going to soak into the fibres, and it means it's going to stay absolutely crisp because it's a pigment ink and it layers over the top rather than sinking in. So we know and we learned that in this case, something like a Brilliance ink pad works really, really well as a pigment ink and works over the top quite nicely. It's also quite acceptable to use on things like acetates, but also a stays-on pigment will work very, very well as well, because that's another pigment based. Even our distress oxides, which we know are dye and pigment, will also work with this technique. And any other pigment where you've got dark cardstock and you want to go over the top with light, that will work really, really well. But let's try, if you like, the hardest, and let's go in with a pure Brilliant white ink pad over the top of black cardstock. So just a couple of things to pick out with the Brilliants, which are archival, light fast as well. They do tend to have a little protective plastic layer over the top, just helps to protect and seal in that ink that's carrier. I always keep mine and replace it after each use. You will find that with various different types of solvent-based ink pads. If I just bring in one of those, they're also in a similar sort of plastic carrier. So just hang on to those. Don't dispose of them, place them back on your ink pad when you've finished, maybe at the end of the day when you're crafting. So I'm going to stamp up my stamp in the same way as I've always done before. Look back over the other videos. Now, because this is white on black, I just want to make sure I've got a really good layer of ink over this. Now, don't need to panic and work really, really quickly. I'm just making sure that I'm pressing down firmly, but I'm also not sort of working the ink pad in really, really hard into all the nooks and crannies, because I don't want to do that. That's going to create more of a smudge. I just want to make sure I'm lightly kissing the surface, and you can see already with just that one pass, I've completely covered that really large stamp, and I love this design. It's very, very nice, great background, and it looks absolutely striking, as you will find an awful lot of your stamps do when they're used white on black. Now, I will just place that on there for good practice, but I wouldn't necessarily do that in between each stamp. I've got to take my stamped image. Now I don't need to panic because I'm using a platform here, so if it doesn't come out perfect the first time, I'm not expecting it to because it is a large stamp, I can go back in with a second inking and a second stamping. But let's just practice what I've gone through before, which is keeping constant pressure down on my stamping platform with one hand, and then with the other just work pressure around the outsides and the centre of my stamp, making sure that these other sort of 2 or 3 fingers are just pushing down. What I'm not doing here is using my whole hand, my whole body weight. Just because it's a big stamp, it doesn't mean I need to apply more pressure. It's just the same amount of pressure. It's just going to take that little bit longer to work all the way around. And I think, again, this is a great example why these tutorial videos here on this Hobby Maker channel is so important, because it does give us demonstrators the time just to show you exactly what's involved. Because I'm going to let that sit there, let the ink sit into the fibres, so it makes sure it transfers off that. I'm not in a rush, there's no rush here. And I can then lift that off, and I can see already striking straight away with just one stamp, I've got a stunning white stamped image. Now I know I can get that better than that. I'm going to go back in with a second stamped image. And again, this is the other benefit of using a platform of any nature. But if you can go for a nice large platform like this, it's going to really kind of future-proof you for all different sizes of stamps in the future. I know this platform's got a few other tricks up its sleeve, but we're just looking at the stamping at the moment here today. And this is just going to allow me to go back in with another image, and I've not gone over quite as many times, no need to. Place that back over the top. Again, I'm not in any rush about the ink drying on the stamp, it's not going to do that. I'm going to go back down. I know that's going to register in exactly the same place that I had before because I'm using a platform, and I'm just going to go through that same process of applying pressure down onto the black cardstock to make sure that that white ink is transferred down. And again, just giving it time to transfer from the stamp onto the cardstock and not releasing it away too quick. This sort of image or impression that sometimes, again, I know I did when I first started crafting, I think it's important to share. I always felt like you had to kind of go wallop, bang. It was almost like almost like a printing press. That's not actually the case. You know, at the end of the day, we're making a handmade project. We're makers. We're doing things that will look handmade. And if you don't get the perfect stamp every time, it really doesn't matter. You often find actually it's a happy accident, and it's kind of created a really novel one-off background. So let's see how that looks. I'm really happy with that. That's come out a little bit more crisper, and it looks really, really nice. Just as a complete background to a project in one go. You could put a topper on there, it could really build up nicely. Let's go a stage further now. Now, I'm not going to clean this off actually I will just clean off a couple of little areas. Now this is a pigment ink pad that we know, and it's also a water-based one, so I can just very quickly go in and just give it a quick clean off like that. Now I'm going to go back in, it's just using a wet wipe here, nothing abrasive, no chemicals. We talked about cleaning and looking after your stamps. This is kind of a clean-up in between working with it. I wouldn't clean it thoroughly while I'm working with the same stamp time and time again. I'm just going to want to make sure that using something like that and a microfiber cloth will be one of your best friends. It really will for your stamps, and it will keep them looking brand new, because trust me, I've used this stamp a lot, but as you can see, it looks absolutely brand new. I'm going to go in with a little tiny gold ink pad. Now we spoke about gold ink pads and small ink pads because they've got a little small Brilliance ink pad, which is exactly the same as that large one that I just used. But this little gold one here is perfect for just picking out details. So let's say in this design I just wanted, just loosely, I'm not going to try and be exact because I want this to be quite, kind of a little bit, just a very random background. I'm going to pick out the crown. I really like that light bulb that's glowing. I think that would look really cool actually in gold. So let's put a little bit of gold. Now this Delica is another, let's do the moth, that's good, is another pigment-based ink pad. So it's going to lay over the top of the black cardstock, but more importantly, it's going to lay over the top, what else shall we pick out? Let's do the birdcage. It's going to lay over the top of that white ink. So anything with these pigment inks is they are opaque, they are solid, they are not translucent. They're going to layer over the top of each other and not show the colour underneath, or less likely to. So again, I could go in with a couple stamps of this. Let's just pick out one more because 5 is always, odd numbers are always better with designs. So let's go in with that little plate at the top. That looks really cool. There we go. It's got those 5 little patches. And this is, again, a great thing with stamping platforms. Couldn't have done this with an acrylic block. I would have never have lined it up. But I'm going to go in there now and just press down, because it's only areas that I've got the ink, is the light bulb. Got that little first class brass plaque, as I'm calling it, the bird cage. What else did we have? Oh, the moth. And we had one other. Do you know? I can't remember. There we go. I'm already forgetting what we did. Moth, bird cage, light bulb. There, let's have a little look. The crown. There's the crown. How could I forget the crown? Right, there we go. So I'm probably going to go in with another layer, but already, can you see how that white and the gold, if I just catch that in the light, is just starting to show a slightly different shade of ink in those areas. But I'm going to go back in with one more pass, and of course you could turn around and take your time with this and take a little bit longer, but I think it's nice just to follow the project through and show you what we're going to create here, just with 2 inks, with the knowledge that we've built up about pigment inks, why we're using those over other inks. And we're now using that knowledge to our creative advantage to create something that we kind of have in mind. So let's have a look, see how that looks. Even better, there we go. So I've now got a really, you can see that quite clearly there, that I've got those nice areas that picked out in gold and white, just using 2 ink pads to create a really striking, stunning background there. Now I could have gone ahead and layered that up with a little bit more ink. There's one I've done previously there, but you can see that actually it's not a lot of difference really. I've just in those areas alone has picked out all of that detail. I've also shown you there an example of using a white distress ink, which is called Picket Fence, which is actually a pigment-based ink. And it's just a little less clear, it's a little bit more pitted because it's a water-based dye pigment ink, and that creates a little bit more movement, but it also means that you can reactivate this with water if you wanted to make it slightly more smudgy, smeary, depends what you want to do with your backgrounds, but just to show you a couple of different examples there. So I'm just going to clear that one off. That what I will let to dry. It just takes a little bit longer to dry because we learnt that it's pigment based, sits on the surface, so don't be tempted to smudge it, just let it go to one side. You can also heat set it with your heat tool that we used previously in the embossing sequence. You can also turn around and just maybe add a little bit of heat just to speed up the drying process to your inks. Nothing wrong with that at all when it comes to something like that to stop you smudging it. So let's pop that to one side, and we're going to have a look at a couple of other techniques. And I'm also going to just take that stamp away, and I will clean that one afterwards because that won't dry too fast at all. And I'm going to have a little look with you with some stays on ink as well and do something a little bit different with that. And I just want to show you some of the different techniques that you can use with stays on. So what I've got here is actually a piece of craft foil that I've just laid down flat onto a piece of cardstock, and it's just a piece of metal that I'm going to lay flat down onto my craft sheet like so. That'll just stick into position. Now there's nothing stopping you going ahead even using something like a really thick aluminium foil or tin foil, as long as it's flattened out. It's just to show you an example what you can use on a non-porous surface, so something where the ink can't soak in readily like cardstock can. So I'm going to place that one in the middle. Now this is a great technique, just to give you an example where you may want to do this. Why would you want to necessarily stamp on metal? I mean, it could be it's a metal tin, it could be a three-dimensional project, it could be a piece of furniture, it could even be something out in the garden. That's the great thing with these pigment inks. They are actually really good for outdoor projects as well. So let's have a look at the black stays on. Now I showed you earlier on, it's got that little protective cover. I'm going to remove that one. I'm using a red rubber stamp. If you've watched other videos, you'll know why that's important when I'm using my solvent-based stays on dye ink pad, because it's just going to be able to stand up to the solvents in this ink, and it's not going to deteriorate or cause any problems whatsoever with my ink pad, with my rubber stamp, sorry. Where a clear stamp, I would just have to work a little bit quicker because I'd be wanting to clean the ink off of that stamp a lot quicker. Right, so I'm just going to go in normal stamping process, nothing different, actually just very light pressure because this is going to sit on the surface. I don't have to let it work into the fibres of any cardstock or anything like that. Let it sit and transfer. I'm just going to show you, I'm going to go back in with another stamp of that. That's not bad, that's already on there. It looks absolutely striking, but I think I can go back in there with just a little bit more ink. Again, just make sure you ink your stamp up on a level platform. I'm just going to go back in there with a second stamp just to layer that up. I probably could have pushed down a little bit harder on that one. But I'm just being delicate because with solvent inks, they sit on the surface, we've learnt that. It means it has a tendency to want to smudge and shift. Now I know we can't see this moving, it's not really moving at all, but as I push down, it is compressing. So there is a tendency to want to just smudge ever so slightly. So you're better off building your image up gradually with something like this, and I'm actually really happy with that. That's come out really nice. Now I'm going to clean that off very quickly. If I'm really quick with the cleaning process of solvent inks, then I can again just use something quite light, like my wet wipe, going quite heavy with it, and I can take the worst of it off, and then I can turn around and just clean that later using some solvent stays on cleaner if I want to. But all that's going to do, and I think it's just important to show you this, is it's just going to stain my stamp, and that really doesn't matter because I've used this stamp time and time again to do this sort of techniques with stamps and inks, and it just makes it a little bit more stained, but it really does not matter. So I'll pop that to one side. But what we've actually done there is we've got a stamped image on a piece of craft foil. Now that means I can go in there with alcohol markers, I could go in there with alcohol inks, anything else that's going to work on a non-porous surface. Now because that's sat on the surface, it does need to dry. It will just take a few minutes to dry off. You can speed the process up with heat setting, but that's just showing you what you can do with stays on craft foil. There's another one that I've done previously there, and that's been done a few hours ago, and I can turn around and just bring in one of our alcohol craft markers, and you'll see that that will work quite happily. If I just go into this petal here, because that's obviously going to work over the top of your craft foil, and you can then add colour to the project. So now we've learnt that we can use the stamped image with the alcohol markers. Now you need to just be a little bit careful because we also learnt that stays on can be kind of re-energized, for want of a better word, and moved around by alcohol markers. But if you're quite quick and this is dry and it's set, then it's okay. We're just putting a very light amount of colour on there, and it's just to add and show you an example of how you can use those sorts of projects and how that would work. So I could do exactly that same technique, that bit of craft foil there as well. Other techniques that you can do with that, there's nothing stopping you, even using your stays on, to go onto a ceramic tile. Yep, this is actually a ceramic kitchen tile. So you could turn around and go in and stamp that same stamped image that we just did on our craft foil, using that same stays on ink onto anything that is non-porous. Glass, ceramic tiles are great. Just think if that was a coaster, and that is on there steadfast. Now it may not be dishwasher safe, or you wouldn't necessarily put it in an area with an awful lot of high use, but I can sit there and give it a good scratch and give it a good rub, and it's really on there really fast, and that's not going to move. So something like on a coaster, it's going to get light wear, or maybe something that's decorative that's not going to get touched an awful lot, is going to last for absolutely years. Or maybe on a garden pot outside on some terracotta, look great. So just think about your stamps so many different ways. As I said right at the beginning of this series, massive value in stamping and inking because there's so much you can do. So yeah, ceramic tiles, just to show you that you can do that. And what about even stamping onto wood? Yeah, wood, I know. So let's take this piece here, and I tell you what, let's do something different. All the way along I've been saying putting your stamp to your actual project. Let's bring back in that large stamp, and this is another reason why I like working with large stamps so much. If I just give this a clean down, take off that previous ink that we had, and I'm going to use another pigment ink that we've got here, And I'm going to use a Memento, which is a Memento Luxe pigment ink. Great for multimedia. It's going to work on a multitude of different cardstocks. It's going to work on fabrics, and it's going to work on wood. And I'm going to prove that to you now. So what I'm actually going to do, just to show you different ways of working, as you become more comfortable with your stamps and your inks, there's so many different ways you can work. There's nothing stopping me actually putting a large, I wouldn't do this with a small stamp, but I'm actually going to use the large stamp, and I'm going to apply my ink down the middle of this stamp, because I only want a piece of it. There's no point in me wasting my ink. And then you can see that's covered really, really well. Pigment based. I've got just a normal piece of soft timber here. This could be a piece of furniture, it could be the bind of a book maybe, or a box or a craft project, whatever you want. I'm actually going to place the piece straight down onto the stamp that I've just inked. Now you could even do this with circular items, because you could actually roll it over the large area of your stamp. Now it depends the finish that you want. I'm just giving it time to just move the ink off of the ink stamp onto the timber. I'm going to lift that off. Look at that. It's absolutely striking. So I've now lifted that design straight off that timber. So if you just remember where we were, completely clear timber, and now we've got, by choosing that colour, it almost looks like it's a heat embossed, almost laser engraved, dare I say. It's obviously completely flat, but it's actually a completely unique project that we've made using, once again, the knowledge that we've got about ink pads and just our rubber stamps. You can really see that value coming into play again. And all I've done here is taken another piece of timber, I've stamped it up, and I've actually just distressed it around the edges and added a little bit more detail and colour. But that could be great as a book spine, journal page spine, like I said, maybe a memory box. It's just showing you the process of what you can do, and it's so, so simple to do. So that's just using again, our inks and our rubber stamps. And there's just one final thing. I'll take this one off and I'll pop that to one side to clean. Again, I know I can leave that safe and sound for a little bit before I go in. I'm just going to bring back in my stamping platform and a piece of craft card, because there's one final thing to bring all of this together, and that's just to look at our Watermark stamp pad, which is our Watermark. Now we used this in the previous video to do heat embossing. It's just a clear oil-based or glycerine-based embossing ink pad that you would use with embossing powders. But this one also works really, really well as a Watermark stamp pad. Now what do I mean by a Watermark stamp pad? Watermark stamp pad basically, if you like, turns down or turns up, however you want to look at it, the colour of your cardstock by sort of 2 or 3 notches. So it's going to darken down my craft card where I stamp. It would darken down even my yellow, green, red, even black, I'll show you that in a minute, cardstock, just by a few notches. So it's not going to add colour, it's actually going to, if you like, change the fibres in the card. So people don't often think of these, they think of them as embossing ink pads, but they're actually truly a Watermark ink pad. It's something that sits into the cardstock. It just takes a while to dry, as we know, so you just need to heat set it if you're not going to add embossing powders to it. So let me show you exactly what I mean. Let's go in with our trusted flower, because I quite like this one. And I'm just going to pick that up, and I'm going to go in over the top with my embossing ink pad, or my Watermark ink pad, the Watermark. Any embossing ink pad will do this, but the Watermark one is particularly engineered with the ink to work as a Watermark ink pad, more so than others. So again, I'm just stamping in the same fashion, and that is going to turn around now, and just by letting that ink transfer over to the craft card, and craft card's great, you get a really nice sort of rustic effect with this. It's just going to knock that cardstock down by a few degrees and just make it that little bit darker. And it is something that's going to improve over time, improve with age, if you like, so I'm told. And if you see that stamped image there at the moment, you can actually see it's already just darkening ever so slightly. And that's not an ink I've applied, it's a completely clear ink, there's no colour in the ink. it's purely the cardstock. Now what that means you can do, if I just bring an example there of a slightly different design, that's exactly what I've done with this card here. All those almost like shadow, could look at tea stain or coffee stains. Also you could do splots and splatches with the background like it's almost been inked up, but all that is there is that exact technique on craft card with a little bit of blending around the edges, which we'll look at in another video, to create this fantastic watercolour effect. So you can create some amazing backgrounds just by using your Watermark ink pad. And just to bring this whole sort of episode together, if you like, just bringing this bit of white black cardstock just to remind us kind of where we've gone. So we've looked at stamping white ink onto black cardstock, which you can clearly see there in the middle. We've just then looked at stamping Watermark onto an ink pad, and as it dries it darkens, and you can see even on dark card, it doesn't show particularly well on the screen, but you can see just down here, that's exactly what I've done there. So even on dark card, you can actually create a watermarked image using that technique I've just showed you. And the other thing I've also explained in kind of demonstrated is the fact that dye-based inks, and you can't see that no matter how much I change it, it's just a faint hue there. Dye-based inks, unlike pigment-based inks, are completely translucent. This is nice and opaque and solid. This is completely translucent. You cannot really see that stamped image on black cardstock, and that's a dye-based, I believe it was a Simon Hurley ink pad, but any dye-based ink pad would create that same nothingness. And trust me, I have stamped, it is very faint, but it is there. But that just shows you the three sort of concepts of inks on black card and how that creates different techniques. So I hope that really helps give you some ideas of how you can create different projects and use your inks and your stamps to your advantage to create the techniques and the backgrounds that you want. We've also looked at stays on as well and using that on the timber effect there, and also on foil and even on ceramic tiles. I mean, literally your creativity is endless with inks and stamps, and I'm sure you're now seeing just where you can go with this. So make sure you like, subscribe, hit that bell underneath. I know I keep asking, it really helps us. And it really helps me as well, because then I can make sure that the next time we bring out a video, you're there, ready and notified, and we can teach you a few more things here at Hobby Maker on their tutorial channel. But until then, thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you all very soon.